Before there was Lean Startup, before there were these big South by conventions, before this was cool, there was a man in Silicon Valley alone in the wilderness trying to sell people a new idea that we could improve the state of the art in entrepreneurship, and we didn't already know everything that needed to be known. In fact, we knew almost nothing at all. And that, I guess, has been now 10 years of Steve being a relentless advocate for this idea. He has done more to advance the state of the art in entrepreneurship than anybody. It has been my absolute privilege to call him a mentor, an investor. I think I've made him more money than I've lost, although I'm not sure. And most importantly, a friend, Steve Blank.
Thank you. So thank you very much. I thought I titled the talk today, the talk of the new book, The Startup Owner's Manual. But it really is the owner's manual for you guys. And every year we kind of have an audience of both experienced entrepreneurs who could draw my slides better than I can, which isn't very hard, and those who are kind of new to the lean and customer development ideas. So today I'm going to split the conversation in half. First, for those of you kind of familiar with the customer development lean philosophy, this is going to be repetitive. Feel free to tweet, check your mail, do something else. And the second half is going to be an example of some hardcore customer development and lean process. And I'm going to give you some real examples of how it works in the real world. So if you can hang on either side, this might be fun. I just want to remind you, this talk is based on Alexander Osterwalder's Business Model Generation book, Eric's Lean Startup book, of course, and my old book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, but I've been happy to be able to take that off and now say that the new book is The Startup Owner's Manual, which kind of replaces 4 Steps to the Epiphany, as I said, now with complete sentences. The thing that I kind of think about is entrepreneurship as a journey, and we wander a lot. But the best line I've ever seen that kind of captured the feeling of what it's like is that not all of us who are wandering are lost. It's part of the journey. And I want to remind you that, we take for granted that startups and businesses and everything we do today has been here forever. But, the first modern corporation is only about 500 years old. In fact, the first modern corporation was the Dutch East India Company in about 1602. It was a government-chartered company. And for the next 300 years, after the East India Company, we got smarter and smarter on how to build companies. We learned about boards, we learned about management, we learned about everything until about 1908, someone at Harvard said, wait a minute, why don't we concatenate all that knowledge for the last 300 years and create a graduate program where we can actually take that management stack about finance, about strategy, about operations, and graduate a class of administrators. And we're going to give them a degree called the Masters of Business Administration. And this became the shock troops for the American century. And by the way, here's the picture. I don't know if you can see that. The first class, 30 guys. That was it. The first MBAs. For better or worse, it started here. Right? Now, what really happened, though, after was really kind of interesting. There were two paths. This was the path to business execution. Because in the United States in the early 1900s, the country was transitioning from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy. Transitioning from local businesses to regional businesses, national businesses. And by the mid-20th century, administrators, executives, large company CEOs now had a stack of tools for administering a business, and it's really what made the United States a leader in big business. But none of these tools were for startups. These were for administrators and executors. But we never understood at the time, and we still have a hard time articulating this, is that startups are not smaller versions of large companies. Big idea. That all the tools that were being taught in business school, all the tools, were for large company execution. And in the last 10 years, or the last 15, the world has changed dramatically. How many of you are in a web mobile cloud business? Okay? That didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. And yet business tools hasn't caught up with this simple idea that we've gone, as Nicholas Negroponte called it 20 years ago, from atoms to bits. Let me explain. You know, when the world kind of started, when we were selling the wheel or food or cars or automobiles, we sold those physical items through a physical distribution channel. You went to a store, you went to a dealership, etc. And then we got smarter and said, well, we could sell stocks and bonds and insurance. Well, those are virtual products, still sold by physical people. But when Amazon showed up, we were starting to sell physical products on the bottom left through a virtual channel. But nowadays, the real game are products and channels that are all bits. They don't exist. Facebook is bits. Google is bits. Most of your products on the apps are bits. The channel is bits, and the product is bits. And that has enormous implications for how quickly we move, how cheaply we could build these things, and how rapidly we could get customer information back. Doesn't mean that the businesses on the bottom right are all dinosaurs, but boy, as quickly as they could move to the left, either bottom left or ultimately top left, you see some interesting strategies. Netflix used to be a physical distribution company. Bookstores who try to stay in the bottom right went out of business. Movie rental companies like Blockbuster. Newspapers, bottom right, very bad place to be. So one of the things we've been working on for the last couple of years was trying to articulate the difference between startups who search for a business model and companies that execute them. And so for me, this idea of search versus execution simply says new ventures, all of you, are actually looking for something. You're on a quest. That you're just not a smaller version of a large company trying to duplicate them. A startup could be in a large corporation or 3 people in a garage, but it's a search versus execution, which differentiates you from anything else. So for example, strategy. When you're searching, you're looking for a business model, and you're trying to test all your hypotheses. When you're executing a business plan or financial forecast, and you're putting together operating plans. Anybody ever been a product manager at all? Anybody ever? Product managers do execution. They put together operating plans and MRDs and forecasts and whatever. Entrepreneurs do search, and search is about a ton of hypotheses, which is a fancy word for guessing. And so the process for searching is customer development and agile development, lean user experience. The whole lean startup activity we're talking about is about the search for a business model. Product managers, world-class people, historically have been taught how to execute and put together the documentation to do that. The other thing that's dramatically different is the organization required for search versus execution. One of the mistakes we've made for startups is trying to model the functions we have in our companies on large companies. Large companies have VPs of sales, we should have VPs of sales. Large companies have heads of marketing, we should have heads of marketing. Never quite understanding that those titles actually connote a job spec for a job that doesn't exist yet. Sales and marketing imply you actually understand who your customers are and what it is you should be marketing. And so you could take a world-class sales and marketing person from a large company, and they often fail. Most often fail in a startup. Yet no one said, what's going on here? What's going on is in a large company, there is a known process to execute. In a startup, you're solving for a series of unknowns. And by the way, Eric has his definition of a startup. I have mine. There are about 500 others. Let me share with you how I think about a startup. To me, a startup is a temporary organization. The design is not for you to be a startup in 10 years. There's no such thing as a 10-year-old startup. There's a 2-year-old startup attached to an 8-year-old failure. The second part of the sentence is it's designed to search, not to execute. You think you're writing code, you think you're doing all this stuff, that's just an aside. You're searching for a repeatable and scalable business model. What's repeatable and scalable mean? I put $1 in, I get N dollars out. I put $1 in, I get a predictable number of users or payers or whatever the metric is I'm looking for. And so now the question is, great, all that makes sense, but what the heck is a business model? Good question. It used to be that we'd throw around the word business model, and if you had 3 academics in a room, you'd come out with at least 9 answers, none of them particularly actionable, until this guy Alexander Osterwalder came up with what I thought was the best definition. Osterwalder said, look, any company is made up of a series of components that helps you create value for yourself while delivering products and services for customers. And he said there are 9 things you should think about. Value proposition, customer segments, channels, relationships, etc. And let me quickly remind you what they are. Osterwalder said, every one of you who's a startup needs to be thinking about all this stuff. While some might seem more important on day one, all of these are important over time. So for example, value proposition. That's really, what are you building and for who? And so when I used to build startups, I used to think, well, the only thing that's important is my product. In fact, first thing I wanted to tell you was about my idea. That was it. This is the only box I used to see. It's about me, it's about me, it's about my idea, and I'm going to execute it. There's nothing more important. Turns out that's a very naive going out of business strategy. But it felt good for the first 6 out of my 8 startups. Yeah, it's about the product. It turns out, no, it's not about the product. It's about like building something for people who either have needs or you're solving a problem. And if you don't understand that that's what it is, you tend to add features until you can't code or build hardware anymore. Because the answer always tended to be, well, we don't know, let's add another feature. And this is Eric's point about eliminating waste. If you don't understand, number 2 is who are your customer segments and why do they actually want to buy from you, you really don't understand what product to build. And for anybody ever hear the phrase product market fit? Anybody ever hear that phrase? That's the value proposition and customer segment interaction. Do you understand what problem you're solving and what features solve that problem? Third is, how am I going to get the product to the customer? What channels? Now, if you're building a web, mobile, cloud product, there's one set of channels. But it turns out if you're building a product for physical channels, those channels are completely different. And so the question is, how does the product get from your company to the customer? Physical channels use one set of distribution. Web, mobile, app stores, e-commerce, etc. Very different. Fourth is customer relationships, which is a fancy term for how do you get, keep, and grow customers. One of the great things about the web is it costs almost nothing to get presence. For a mobile app, it costs almost next to nothing, other than dealing with Apple, to get your product online. But just getting it up now creates a whole nother set of problems. Is how do you get, keep, and grow these customers? And by getting, keeping, and growing, what I mean is, how do you get them first to your site or your app? How do you activate them? How do you keep them over time? And then how do you grow them? It turns out that get, keep, and grow is not just a funnel, it's actually a dumbbell. And I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about what it looks like. That's a joke, you're supposed to laugh. That you really want customers getting in the canonical funnel, but you want to figure out how to keep them over their lifetime and then grow them with specific activities. Revenue streams. How do you make money from these people? And revenue streams and revenue models are very different than pricing. People tend to confuse, oh yes, revenue, well my revenue model is $9.99. No, that's your pricing, and that's a tactic. The question is, are you direct sales? Are you freemium? You know, do you have an affiliate program? Is it a multi-sided market where you have users who are using the product for free and you have payers? Pricing is the tactics that you use. Key resources. What do you need? What's your most important assets? Now, it's easy to say, well, my most important asset is money. Yeah, okay. But it actually might be more than just money. It might be, do I need physical resources? Do I need intellectual resources? And do I need human resources? And when you're building a company, you need to really start thinking about this. If you're in Silicon Valley, you might have access to a ton of money, but boy, are you competing for human capital. If you're in some other part of the country, human capital might be that is people you can hire are a lot easier to get, but money is tough. And so you need to start thinking about those. Key partners. Who are your partners and suppliers? You know, at first glance, I used to go, you know, let's worry about this later. Can anybody think about what the iPod and iPhone would have been without content partners? Would have been just another piece of hardware and software. Apple was playing a business model strategy, not just a value proposition and customer strategy. These guys were playing this game for real. And for them, partners happen to be as important as the product. So key partnerships. Who are they? They could be content partners, they could be suppliers, they could be anything else. Are the key resources that you might need from others, and you need to figure out whether they complement your activities or not. They could be strategic alliances, they could be non-competitors, they could be joint ventures, etc. And then the next to last piece is key activities. What is it that's most important for you to do? Is it programming? Is it production? Is it coding? Is it manufacturing? Is it, if you're a consulting firm, is it problem solving? What are you great at? And understanding that on day one is really important. And then finally, you kind of add this all up, and it's what are the costs and expenses? You know, how much does this thing cost to go build? How much money am I going to need to raise? What are the direct costs? What are the indirect costs? And when I add this all up, I have a business model. Now, what's really interesting is that when I'm done, I could now take all these hypotheses and draw them on the board. And actually, what we use are yellow stickies because they're going to change rapidly. We take these hypotheses, and by the way, I like to use the word hypotheses when I teach at Stanford because those students pay 50 grand, honestly. Right? But outside, in the real world, we call them guesses. We're recording this because I really call them fucking guesses, right? To use a Dave McClure word, actually, that I was just going to borrow. So I got to tell you, you know, this, like, I could teach a whole class on business model design, and people go, oh yes, in theory, oh yes, look at the segment, and but at the end of the day, you're still left with effing guesses. And though they're much prettier, and they're actually a lot better than writing a business plan, because you got to use yellow stickies and you got to use whatever, but at the end of the day, you still don't have much action. What you have is a lot of great thinking, but you don't have any action. So the question is, how do we change these guesses into facts immediately? And that's where customer development, the 4 steps, comes in. It's the startup path. What we're going to do is take these hypotheses and test them against a 4-step process called customer discovery, customer validation, and these first 2 are the search for the business model. And then after we find the business model, we're going to build our company with customer creation and company building. And so the big idea about these 4 steps, for those of you familiar with it, is just one idea. If you remember anything about customer development, there are no facts inside your building, so get the hell outside. Just very simple. And by the way, how many of you think you're smart? Come on, how many of you think you're smart? How many of you think you're really smart? Okay? You're at a major disadvantage. Because us stupid people are not smart enough to say, well, I got all the answers, what the hell do I need to get outside for? You guys, you know, are like screwed. Because I got to tell you this, I deal with this all the time. My Stanford students go, well, we are the smartest people in the world. Yeah, well, you still don't know shit. Sorry, I'm just channeling Dave this afternoon. But literally, you have to admit 10 neurons of my passion, my vision, and my pure genius should maybe be tested if someone else cares other than me and my mother. Right? And so the whole idea about customer development is you write these hypotheses down, you all look at them and whatever, and then you get out of the building. You create a canvas, you get out, and you run a series of experiments and tests, talking to customers, talking to partners, getting your teeth kicked in, having your brilliant vision just either confirmed only in your dreams, or reality starts emerging. And so you're designing experiments, running tests, getting data, but you're not just looking at numbers. You're getting insight. And this is the second biggest mistake entrepreneurs make. The first one is sitting in their building. The second one is, see, I'm doing customer development. I did a WebMonkey survey and 4,000 people said yes. Well, that's like the halftime score is 3. 3 to what? Number one is customer development, at least as I advocate, is not the law of numbers. It's the law of insight. You could tell me 4,000 people said I'd pay $9.99. Well, what about the 50 who said no? Oh, they hated the product. Well, what did they say? Well, if we would have added these 25 features, they would have paid $1 million each. What? Yes, but they didn't want our $9.99 product. What do you think you should have done? I might have went back and talked to those 50 people and said, well, can I get a purchase order now? Sometimes the insight is on the outliers. So I just want to warn you, getting out of the building is not just mass data. Because another Steve favorite phrase is, if it was, accountants would be running startups. Anybody think they're an accountant? Don't raise your hand because I might just diss you. All right? But it's about insight. It's why you're artists. It's why entrepreneurship will be and is and will forever last as an art, not as a science, even though we'll talk about it as a management science. In customer development, you're testing the problem and then the solution. So what you're doing, as I said, is you're looking for these insights. You want to hear that this doesn't work. And this all fits into the MVP, the iteration, the pivots. As you're getting feedback, you're marking up the canvas, and you're starting a new one. New experiments, new tests. And what's kind of interesting is that for the first time, if you use a business model canvas, for the first time ever, we could now take a series of canvases. I make my students rip off a page and write a new one every week, and then post them as a stack of canvases and play them back. For the first time in the history of entrepreneurship, we could now see the entrepreneurial process unfold like a film strip. First time. And I'll show you that as an example. So, how am I doing for time? Yeah, doing all right? Really? I'm doing okay on time? I can't believe it. So let me tell you what we've done. We put all this stuff in the Startup Owner's Manual. It's now taught at Stanford, at Berkeley, at Columbia. I'm proud to announce the National Science Foundation, the U.S. government agency that funds all science and engineering in colleges and universities, has adopted this book and my course called the Lean Launchpad as the standard for teaching science and engineers and how to commercialize their technology. Other government agencies will be announcing the same later this year, large corporations, etc. Yes, there's an e-book version coming for anybody who's asked, so let me preempt that. There's going to be free autographed copies tomorrow just down the hall at the Startup America salon. I'll be there from 1:30 to 3 if anybody wants some. Let me just give you some excerpts from the book. You know, the last book, if anybody, does anybody see the 4 Steps to the Epiphany? Yeah, oh God, I'm embarrassed. So there used to be one path. Here was step 1, 2, 3, etc. If you remember, my observation is that there really is two different paths, a physical channel and a web mobile channel. And physical startups run at a different speed than web, mobile, and cloud. And they do different things. So what we've done in the book is simply bifurcated the process and said, if you're in web, mobile, or cloud, you do this. If you're in a physical startup, here's what you do. And let me just give you an example. Step by step, for both web, mobile, and physical channels, let's just take a look at customer relationships. If you remember Get, Keep, and Grow, this is Dave still here? I think Dave McClure left. This was inspired by his Pirates ARG. Have you ever seen Dave's ARG presentation? Awesome. If you haven't seen it, you should all go to SlideShare and search for Dave McClure. Basically, we were trying to understand, how does the funnel work for startups? And so we just kind of made it step by step: acquire, activate, keep, what are the things you do, and then how do you grow customers, and where does viral loop come in, and what are the activities you need to do. And this is the kind of stuff you'll see in the book. And by the way, if you're building physical products, this is the Get, Keep, and Grow funnels structurally are the same, but the activities you do are just different. So can I now go into how does this really work? This is enough theory and pretty pictures. Can I just give you some real hardcore examples? So I teach a class that takes this 8 weeks from an idea to business. These students are taking a full-time course load at Stanford and at Berkeley and wherever else I teach it. And these are their slides, untouched. Untouched. This was their final presentation last week. You can also see these and more of them on my blog at steveblank.com. If you go there, you'll see tons of examples. So their name was Team Dynamo. They eventually changed the name of the company to something called Nudge. They did 252 face-to-face interviews in 8 weeks. So when you guys are saying it's hard to get out of the building, I just want to put in context what a bunch of students are doing with a full-time class, plus 10 partners, and then surveyed online another 76. I don't consider a survey an interview. To me, a survey is you've seen somebody's pupils dilate, and therefore you could correlate whether you have real data or not. So this was the team, 4 of them. This was their background. Here's what we're going to talk about. Basically the evolution of their idea, their journey, and then where they ended up at the end of the 8 weeks. The goal, by the way, was not to be an incubator or start a company. The goal was to teach them this customer development, agile engineering, lean methodology, and if they decide to start a company, so be it, but it's a school. And so this was their view of what it would kind of look like through the process. I don't know if they were pointing out that the first icon was me and the last icon was them, but we're going to go through step by step about how their ideas iterated and pivoted and changed as they got more customer data. They started as a travel booking portal for Middle Easterns. That was their idea. About 3/4 of the team were from the Middle East. They had some travel experience, and they said, let's build a travel website. And so they wanted to make a Middle Eastern-focused platform, group discounts, flash sales, ramp up strategies through social conversations, and preserve memories through photo sharing and quotes. And so this was their first business model canvas. And if you look at it, first couple things that struck us is their value proposition was 14 pages long. They wanted to be too broad of a platform with too many value propositions. And market size, they did the standard Stanford, let's go to the library and look up how big the travel market is. Well, duh, my dog could do that. They really didn't use net numbers. They didn't do any bottom-up analysis. And their customer segments was, again, everybody. Young and the affluent, young and single, young couples, young family. Remember, they're telling this to an old guy right here. And, I'm kind of going, I think I get it. It's young. And their key learning was they needed to focus. This is their first week, by the way. And they did this after talking to 20 people. And they needed to do bottoms-up sizing. So week 2, they interviewed another 20 people. They did an iteration, and they said, well, we're not just a booking platform for Middle Easterns. We're going to be a social travel planning. And so we're going to do group travel. And we're going to do a seamless, enjoyable travel experience who want pleasurable trip planning. And so this was their new canvas. And what they did was they crossed out, about 15 of their value props. And they said, no, the value prop we're now offering is easy and pleasurable trip planning. And our partners are going to be social networks and travel publications. And this is kind of what our site's going to look like. But when they researched this, they said, uh-oh. There's several existing competitors who do the exact same thing, and it's a crowded and hyper-competitive market. We just invented something someone else is doing much better. And so their key learning here was we should have looked at the competitive landscape earlier. And there were domain experts they could have talked to. They just never bothered to get out of the building. All right. So they talked to another 64 people in that next week. 64 in the week. Okay? And they said, all right, we're going to pivot back to our original idea about Middle Eastern travel, but we'll do it for expatriates. And so we're going to be a travel planner for expatriate students, that is, students from the area who frequently visit the Middle East. And so they pivoted again, and they said our value proposition is young and affluent, our customer segment, young and affluent, high disposable incomes, willing to explore, word of mouth. Again, social networks, and our revenue stream is we're going to take a cut of the booking. What was the problem? The market was too small, no homogeneity in the customer needs, too low frequency of travel to make this a business segment. And now they're understanding that market sizing is crucial. All right, let's try it again. Let's interview another 33 people and survey another 46. So let's make this safe travel for U.S. people to the Middle East, where I said, well, maybe the safest travel for U.S. people to the Middle East is not go, but that didn't quite. I said, I think you guys are missing something. So, okay, platform to facilitate Americans to travel to the Middle East. This was their slide, not mine. And so they decided that, they're going to survey more people, and they wanted to get young Americans who wanted more insight, and they'll be the trusted source for insight. So they realized the value proposition was safety. No, you can't get killed, but it'll be really exciting while they try to kill you. And that's the way I kind of described it. It's alumni associations. And again, it's still a percentage of booking costs. And so they actually launched this website on week 4. It went live. They got 42 bookings. People actually booked travel on it. It had full functionality. Their site went up 4 weeks from the day they started. Right? They've already spoken to 100 and some odd customers. But then they spoke to a founder of another company like this who did this for Greece. And he said, great idea. This is a brilliant idea. I did this for Greece. Not the Middle East, but for Greece. And by the way, after 10 years, I built it into a $5 million company. Some of you are laughing. Maybe for some of you, that's a big number. For the rest of you, that's a horrible number. Because these guys said, there's no way this is venture scalable. Right? It's a nice small business, and if I wanted to end up with a travel agency, that's great. But this really isn't a business. So their market size needed to be venture scale. They wanted to disrupt the travel space, so they said, let's rethink the entire idea. This was a major pivot. They said, wait a minute, why don't we build a social platform that nudges people to travel? We'll pivot to a brand new market, inspire people to travel more, and based on social graph and travel history. And so they looked at the competitive landscape, which I'll show you the revised one later. They did a new business model canvas, this time on enrichment. They did a bottoms-up total available market. They said, listen, the target market is still about $250 million. It looks big enough to start. They did a mock-up. Started using this for customer interviews, interviewed 52 more people, started iterating on this idea, interviewed another 50 people, and finally ended up with an idea that says, wait a minute, we've been focused on travel. Why don't we just nudge people to enrich their lives in general? And so they expanded their nudges to include activities, events, social reminders, rather than just travel, to keep users more engaged with frequent nudges, like reminders. And they would get all this stuff from their social graph. And they went out of the building and found out that people actually want to be nudged in other things than just travel. And that mobile is the most effective medium to increase engagement. And so they started talking to a set of segments that really said, this is kind of interesting. And by the way, it was very hard for them, but they X'd out their online travelers. And so they did 15 more interviews, more partners. They actually got the site up and running. And they created this company called Nudge. And so their final canvas looks like this. Right? What their value proposition now is enrichment. And they're targeting students and graduates and young families, and yeah, travel websites as well, but their customer archetypes look like this. We made them actually go through and put together archetypes, and who were they, and what do they want to do, etc. And the types of nudges were occurring events, events that you're aware of, events that you kind of subconsciously are aware of. You want a social push. You also want some of this to happen serendipitously. And the intersection of all of that was their product called Nudge. And so they then did a pilot test in the last week, and 103 people tried the product. 42 people engaged and left their emails, which they thought were pretty good. And they started sending out tailored nudges. You know, a nudge would be, visit the Rodin Sculpture Garden this week and get inspired. Or it's 4 months till you graduate, take your best friend out for a coffee at Coupa Cafe. They basically think that they're going to end up being a recommending platform. They talked to a series of partners with revenue sharing agreements. They looked at their demand creation costs. And they looked at the competitive landscaping. And because there was one MBA in the group, I have to show you this last slide. They actually did an income statement, which I got to tell you, this was the one I was maddest about. Right? And so their lessons learned, this is, again, their slide: focus, market sizing, environment, culture, mentorship, open to pivot, distill your insights. So what's next is they're applying to a series of incubators. This is 8 weeks worth of work, guys. You guys are smarter and better. You could do this yourself. So a round of applause to these guys. So I just want to remind you, can we turn down the lights? Can we turn down the lights? I want to remind you, for me, you know, why we do this. Do you remember, can anybody see that? It's the only lights we didn't turn down are the ones shining on the screen. I didn't mean to put these guys in the dark. I don't know if we could do that. Can anybody see this at all? Or? All right. These are the Harvard first class, right? 1908 class. So they were born 120 years ago. What we know is they're all dead. We're all dead. There was a clip from a movie that I have to tell you I saw early in my career that made me remember why we do this. And let me just show you that clip and close on it.
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Now, who knows what that means? Carpe diem. That's seize the day. Very good, Mr. Meeks. Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thank you for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. I'd like you to step forward over here and peruse some of the faces from the past. You've walked past them many times. I don't think you've really looked at them. They're not that different from you, are they? Same haircuts, full of hormones, just like you. Invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait until it was too late to make from their lives even one iota of what they were capable? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils. If you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in. Listen. You hear it? Seize the day, boys. Make your lives extraordinary.
So make your lives extraordinary. Thank you very much for your time.